Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to be talking about the VARC strategy for CAT. And the reason that we decided to make this video is that we have a lot of students asking us why their VARC percentiles are not rising. So a lot of them manage to get to about a 70 or an 80 percentile or even a 90, but somehow they get stuck there. And one of the main reasons is that accuracy is not that great. So in VARC, a lot of times we find it easy to attempt a lot of questions because come on, it is just VARC. But a lot of those questions are not right. And the negative marking hits our score and lowers our percentile. So in this video, we are going to be focusing on how to increase your accuracy. And while you may not agree with some of the things I say, I still want you to give it a shot. So for example, if you are an IMS student, I would definitely want you to experiment with some of these methods in the take-home SimCats. And for the rest of you who may not have been IMS students or are not IMS students, then you can try it out in whatever test you have currently. Now, let's get started by first looking at the data. So the data is always important because it speaks for itself. But of course, I'm going to help you interpret it in order to present the arguments that I want to make. Now, the data here has been presented for 3 years, 2021, 22 and 23. So if you look at the scores, we see that the scores for VARC, and this is only VARC, it has been on the decline. So from 22, it has come down to about 17. And if we look at the remaining columns also, we would see that there is a general decrease. What does that tell us? Well, it could tell us many things. One is that perhaps the test has gotten a little more difficult. Secondly, perhaps our abilities in this section have gone down. But let's take the first interpretation that the test might have become a little more challenging. Now, if the test has become more challenging, logically what we should be doing is to maybe reduce the number of attempts. But for some reason, people are not really doing that. So let's take a look at how many attempts are required in order to get to a particular percentile. So let's take a look at the 85th percentile, which for most of us is pretty important because this is the sectional cutoff that we keep in our SimCats, in our take-home SimCats, in pretty much every test that you take at IMS. Now, the 85th percentile is a very safe percentile to aim for because it does not require too much effort. Let's take a look. So if you see, the numbers have generally come down over the years from 25 to 20. So in order to score 20 marks, how many questions should I be attempting? Let's assume that we have 100% accuracy. I would say probably about 7 questions if we get them all right. But considering that it's a VARC section, that is very, very unlikely. So what is most likely going to happen is that you will probably attempt about 12 questions and maybe get about 8 right. This is a fair ratio. This is the kind of accuracy that we aspire for. So in VARC, the kind of accuracy that we would say is good is maybe about 65 to 70%. Of course, if you have something better than that, that's fantastic. But if you do not have 80 or 90%, I would say don't worry about it excessively because this section is like that. So let's assume that we're attempting about 12 questions and we're trying to get 8 correct. That's not a very high number. So those of you who are still wondering about how to clear the cutoff, this is basically what you need to do. You need to reduce the number of attempts. Now further, what if we have already reached the 85th percentile and now we want to get to the 90th percentile? Then we just need to get one more question right, which means we might want to attempt 2 more questions. Instead of 12, maybe we want to go to 14 and hopefully get about, again, 8 or 9 right. So ultimately, what we believe to be true about VARC is that we have to attempt many questions. But the data shows us that that's actually not true. You need to focus on accuracy. Simply attempting a lot of questions is not going to help you attain the percentile. So I'm not really going to go past the 90th percentile. Of course, you can figure out the rest on your own. But the basic message is be careful, lower your attempts if your accuracy is poor. But let's talk about the rest of it. How do I attempt? What is the order in which I attempt? How do I select the questions and the passages that I want to do? So for that, let's take a look at what could possibly work. Now, I've already made the point that you should not be attempting a lot of questions in VARC. Just because you feel it's easy does not necessarily mean it's easy. And we have already seen that you can easily reach an 85 or a 90 percentile by attempting somewhere around 50 to 60% of the questions only. So why work harder in case there is no need for it? Let's focus on accuracy first. But now let's talk about time management and the order of attempts. This is a question that has come to us many times. So I think that the section itself tells you how to manage your time. There are more RC questions and fewer VA questions. Typically 16 from RC and 8 from VA. So I should obviously give more time to RC and less time to VA. So how would I distribute the 40 minutes? I would probably say 25 to 30 minutes for RC and about 10 to 15 minutes for VA. It is as simple as that. Now the reason we've given you a range is that not everyone works the same way. Some people take more time to read the RC passages and some take less. You might also spend a few minutes deciding which passage to select and what is the order in which you want to solve. So that's perfectly fine. Now what about VA versus RC? Which one should you do first? I would probably say try it out in the mock test, and whatever works for you is the right strategy. So for example, I prefer to start with VA, and the reason is that I know that VA, at least the theta questions in VA, are fairly risk-free. So I would start with a parajumble, not necessarily because I'm great at it, but because I know that there's no negative marking. So even if my brain is not too warmed up, it's all right. For you, that may not work. You may not really like to start with VA. You might want to start with RC. So as I said earlier, it is whatever works for you. There is no one right path. And how do you know what works for you? The answer is obvious. Try it out in the mock tests. So if you're an IMS student, please try it out in your take-home SimCats. And then again, try it out in the proctored SimCats and see if it helps. After every 3 tests, you could decide to change your strategy and see if something works better. But after a while, let your strategy be decided and then follow through on that. So now let's move on to the next part. How do I know which passage to select? So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because this is something that we do for our IMS students. But for now, I will just say that passage selection typically is dependent on 3 criteria: language, content, and topic. The way to decide is to pick the passage that you can read the fastest. So language is a very important criterion. Now, when I say content, content refers to how the matter is presented to you. Is it an opinion-based passage or is it a fact-based passage? Typically, I would go for an opinion-based passage later. Why? Because I would expect some reasoning questions from that passage. But fact-based passage, called informative or descriptive passages, typically are slightly easier to read. They may be very boring, but they're not very difficult most of the time. So I would want something that has easy language and is fairly informative. Now what about topic? This is a subjective thing. I might love philosophy, so I might actually want to start with a philosophical passage. But other people might detest philosophy, in which case philosophy would be the last thing that they do. But I would also put in a word of caution here that you should not rely entirely on your preferences to decide. So please focus on the first 2 criteria, look at the language and look at the type of content. Topic is something that you can always work on. You still have a lot of time. Make sure that nothing is truly detestable for you by the time that you get to CAT. And now, the VA strategy. See, first of all, we have to understand that in VA, accuracy will not be as high as it will be in RC. Let's live with that fact. And one of the reasons is the theta questions, particularly the parajumbles. So, if we know that VA accuracy is lower, the only thing that we can really control is the time that we devote to this section. So here again, attempt all the theta questions, but probably don't spend more than 1.5 minutes on them. Average it out. So for example, if I'm doing 2 parajumbles, I should not take more than 3 minutes. If I'm spending 5 minutes on 2 parajumbles, given the fact that my accuracy is not going to be very high, that's going to be a bit of... But you should become selective when you attempt the MCQs, which is your para-completion and your summary questions. If it is something you don't understand, if it is something that is very lengthy, you don't have to do it. There's no compulsion to do all 8 out of 8 questions. Remember, we said at the beginning that you have to do about 12 questions. That could be 6 from VA and 6 from RC. So what is the composition is something that you have to decide depending on the nature of the questions and the difficulty of the questions on the day of the test. But for now, what I really want you to focus on is accuracy. Do not attempt questions just because you feel that you will get them right. Look at the data. The data will tell you what you need to do. So with this, I would like to close. Wish you all the best for your CAT prep Try out the strategy, see if it works. Now, if you need more information or if you're looking for more content-specific videos, then we have a Best of CAT series for, of course, CAT. We also have a Best of ZAT series in case you're looking at that particular exam, in which we have solved some interesting questions from previous papers. If you're looking for the entire solved paper, we also have video solutions for some of the past CAT papers available. So if you look at the description, you will find those links. For now, I would just say, believe in yourself, don't become overconfident, and test out the strategies.